many governments and general public opinion around the world really are starting to question whether we can continue to pollute that environment. Pollute it with carbon emissions, pollute it with other pollutants, and not have impacts, not even on us today, but have impacts on future generations. The general public is beginning to wake up and demand that the building industry around the world, not just here in California, around the world, be more responsible for the environment in which we live and the environment in which those buildings are being built in. Both rising energy costs and increased global awareness on climate change are really continuing to drive home the message that high-performance, environmentally responsible buildings will be the future in our industry. You know, in my theme this year, I challenged all of us to be more innovative in coming up with ways that we could improve the performance of the buildings that we design and construct and operate. Not just improve the design, not what's on paper, but truly to go out and measure these buildings and see how we can actually improve the building performance themselves. That's really what the challenge is all about. You know, according to the 4th assessment report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they've targeted actually the building industry, both global, residential, and commercial building industry, is the one sector that has the greatest potential for reducing carbon emissions around the world with the technology we have available to us today. We're not looking at new technologies. We're not trying to create carbon sequestering or things that might be out in 15 or 20 years in application. We have the technology today to design and construct and operate buildings that are much more efficient than what we've been able to do in the past. You know, this graph is just an example of that. You know, today building energy efficiency still represents a vast and underutilized energy resource in the world. You know, classic example of a report that was actually done by the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy. And they show cost of saved energy for 72 emerging building energy efficient technologies in increasing order of cost to save energy when compared to the cost to actually build new power plants. Now, here in California, I'm somewhat preaching to the choir, because the good thing is we're pretty proactive. The Public Utilities Commission in California and the utility companies understand these issues. But trust me, there's many places I go, even in the United States, where they really don't understand these issues. They haven't figured out a business model for the public utilities to actually make money without selling more energy. There is more money to be made in energy efficiency if we really structure these things correct. You know, also I'd like to put it in perspective, because there's been a lot of discussion regarding carbon emissions and things, and some of us don't really even have an understanding of where our energy comes in the United States. This latest statistics from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency have the data for 2005, and it still shows that we as Americans love our automobiles. 40% of our energy is consumed by petroleum, 23% by both natural gas and coal, 8% from nuclear, and yes, only 6% of our total energy comes from renewable sources in the United States. It's also important to understand where electricity is coming from, since about 71% of all the electricity is consumed by buildings in the United States. And in the year 2005, which was the latest data the EPA has out, 51% of our electricity was generated by coal. Now, the good news is I'm in California, and less than 1% of our electricity actually came from coal generation in the year 2005. So, and now we basically don't allow any more coal generation. So we actually are pretty good with the statistics relative to some of these. But the interesting thing, where do you really see any renewable up there? It happens to be just those two 1% slivers at the top of the pie. Pretty small amount for the United States if we want to show a leadership position. Why is the building industry being targeted? Well, it was a little bit before the year 2000 that the building sector, both residential and commercial, actually overcame all other sectors as the sector that have the largest amount of greenhouse gas emissions on an annual basis. The States Energy Information Administration recently reported that world energy consumption is projected to increase approximately 70% from the year 2003 to 2030. Now, the International Energy Agency has a similar projection in the World Energy Assessment Report that actually is projecting that world energy consumption will double from the year 2000 to 2050. Now, the sad thing is, when you look at these projections out to 2030, oil is still forecast to be the dominant energy source, And coal is still forecast to be the primary fuel for generating electricity. So as the world is becoming more developed, our energy mix is actually becoming more carbon intensive. You know, most of us in the room today know how fuel efficient our automobiles are, expressed in miles per gallon. But what about the buildings that we design, that we operate, that we use? How many of us truly understand how much energy those buildings consume in a given year per square foot? I suspect very few of us. The fact is, those buildings consume enormous amounts of energy, both for construction and operation. Residential and commercial buildings already account for a vast amount of the total primary energy used in the United States, approximately 40%. Now, these statistics aren't much different in other countries I go to. Canada actually happens to be one of the lowest I've seen. They're only at about 34% as far as overall energy from a primary energy standpoint. These have ranged anywhere from 34% up to 54% in countries that have actually visited this year and been able to look at these statistics. And the built environment is continuing to expand around the world. Today, more and more people are seeking to improve their quality of life, as the world population increase continues to drive the demand for more and more buildings.